begin with sort of just setting the stage for this. I am Calvin Neufeld. I am a co-founder of Evolve Our Prison Farms. I've been involved in this since 2016. It has been a long journey, as many of you would know if you have been following along. We have had people who have been following for about 4 years now. And I don't know if any of us thought that we would still be in this 4 years down the road. And also what we didn't expect was that what began as a proposal in 2016, when the government was seeking public input into what model the new prison farm should adopt. We worked together with academics and prison farm activists to come up with what we saw as the best possible model for the return to prison farms, taking what was beneficial from the original program and enhancing it today. It was a clean slate, so we sort of felt that this was an opportunity to progress. So what began as a simple proposal for essentially plant-based agriculture, modeling climate solutions, and the potential of offering animal-assisted therapy. It was a very simple evidence-based proposal. And then that had, it turned into a very different story as we discovered that prison farms were no longer going to be feeding prisoners like they did in the past, that prison farms would be basically selling product to the private sector, that we were looking at industrial animal agriculture and all kinds of problems and essentially the violation of human rights. So we're going to be going into this in the presentation, but what began as simply an idea and a vision turned into a campaign to oppose something very problematic that was being introduced in Canada, and to investigate and expose what was happening, because this was not public knowledge. It took a great deal of work to find out what's actually happening, and then now going from that position of opposition to also working very hard to develop the alternative model that can replace this very problematic model that is still very slowly being rolled out because of all of the problems that they are facing. So we are also working in an attempt to salvage the prison farm program itself, and while raising awareness and while opposing a very, very problematic model. So it's a multifaceted campaign, and it's been quite a journey that has brought us into essentially big politics, big money, big industry. But we really do feel that we have truth and justice on our side and evidence on our side, and we're not letting go of this until prison farms do no harm. So I would like to introduce our new outreach and advocacy coordinators who have been working with us for the past couple of months, excellent members of the team. Julia Miller is in Kingston, Ontario, and she is an experienced community organizer, an activist, and a professional in the health field. She's a specialist in health and public health and nutrition and neuroscience, and trauma as well. So all of her expertise lends itself very, very well to this issue, and she's very passionate about human rights, animal rights, and the climate crisis. So she's going to be moderating our meeting here today, and Darren Chang is going to be leading us in a presentation. Darren has degrees in political theory and critical animal studies, which he takes a focus through a colonial lens, and working to build solidarity between different movements and interspecies solidarity as well. So a very, very intelligent person, educator, scholar, and he has a masterful ability to articulate complex issues in a way that anybody can understand and relate to. So with that, perhaps, Julia, if you want to just, if there's anything, any technical thing, if people have questions, we'll just wait until Darren is done with his presentation and then open up for discussion. But if you want to just give sort of the basics about how people can, how this is going to work, and then we can get into Darren's presentation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Calvin. So we are definitely excited to hear everyone's comments and questions and have a really lively discussion. We are asking that folks keep their lines muted until Darren is completed his presentation, and then we'll try to have an organized way to allow for that discussion. So if you want to just let me know in the chat if there's something you'd like to say, and then we'll try to do it in an orderly fashion. I do remind everybody that we are recording this presentation, and we're doing our first attempt at Facebook live streaming as well. So just to keep that in mind, and if anyone is not comfortable with that but wants to participate, just let me know and we can edit the recording. So I'm very excited that you've all joined us, and I'm looking forward to Darren's presentation.
Cool. Just one more thing too. I noticed that with the Facebook live stream with Zoom, how it works is the image is showing whoever happens to be speaking. So just be aware of that. Like if you do want to use your microphone to ask a question later or speak, but you don't necessarily want your face, in the video or anything, just turn off the webcam. And there, like Julia said, there are other options too, like if you want to type in your question in the chat and things like that. There are different ways to work around it. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share and get this presentation started. And thanks, Calvin, for the introduction. Thanks, Julia, for setting up all this tech things with Zoom. Can everyone see the screen, the presentation here? Cool, perfect. I gotta minimize my Zoom here so I can see the slides. Okay, cool. So before I actually begin the presentation, I just wanna, we can't really do a land acknowledgement because we're on Zoom and people are, all throughout the country and in different places. But I do wanna talk just briefly about the name of this kind of new community forum series, and also kind of a campaign idea that we came up with called No Kids in Prisons. And this is just an sort of play on the word kids, obviously meaning baby goats. And we know that the proposed dairy farm model is going to be exploiting thousands of goats. And so no kids in prisons in that sense, we want to stop this goat farm that is going to be exploiting prison labor. But at the same time, I think it's important for us who are doing social justice work on stolen indigenous land to acknowledge that the prison system, the institution itself, has played a really sort of central role in both stealing indigenous territories and lands, as well as just playing that role of colonization and exerting all sorts of violence against indigenous communities. And we know for a fact that indigenous peoples, especially indigenous youths, are currently just overrepresented in prison populations. And so those are the kinds of issues that we definitely want to address as well as part of this campaign. Cool, so that's that. Here's a brief overview of our presentation today. So first, I'm gonna briefly go over just the history of the campaign and some of the highlights. Then I'll update everybody on where the campaign is today. Then we'll move into identifying our goals. What are our specific asks, and what does a victory actually look like for us? And for those who are interested in volunteering with the campaign, it's very important that we are on the same page about our messaging and our focus. So that we'll go over a little bit of that as well. And we'll end the presentation by just talking about some of the upcoming actions and ongoing actions as well, and volunteer opportunities, things that we'll be needing help with. So Calvin has already kind of done a great job earlier with summarizing kind of a brief history of the Evolve Our Prison Farms campaign. But so here I just want to point out that, we are an adaptive campaign that has kind of grown and learned and adapted to changing circumstances, especially as more and more research is done, and we're constantly sort of learning new things. And for those who are paying attention on our social media, you'll see that, you know, even within just the last few weeks, you know, things have changed quite a bit. We've gotten word that perhaps the Chinese infant formula corporation, Feihe, is, you know, possibly failing, and that now we have all these really kind of critical sort of opportunities for us to actually push through this alternative proposal that we have. So things are constantly changing, and we're sort of learning as we go as well. But one thing has always stayed the same, which is our core values. So despite how the conversations around the prison farm issue may have changed, we as a campaign has always remained committed to prisoners' justice, food justice, environmental justice, and as well as justice for non-human animals. And that has always been sort of the main focuses of this campaign. By addressing the prison farm issue, we can sort of, it allows us to see how all these issues are actually interconnected, and we can, and what sort of a vision of justice looks like for all those involved. So just again, briefly, there used to be prison farms, and those prison farms were not for profit, and they fed prisoners. Those who supported the prison farm programs believed that, you know, the prison farms had, you know, really like beneficial things for the prisoners in terms of rehabilitation. Unfortunately, things have changed, and now the model that's being proposed is that prison labor will be exploited for private sector gains, and again, still possibly to produce infant formula that's going to be exported to China. So about a decade ago, there was locally in Kingston, Ontario, there was a campaign called Save Our Prison Farms. And at the time, the Harper Conservatives, the Conservative government, wanted to shut down the prison farm programs. And that actually ignited one of the most kind of radical grassroots organizing in the Kingston region, an attempt to save the prison farms and stop it from being shut down. And it formed this really sort of just really broad-based coalition where environmental activists, food justice activists, prison justice activists all sort of came together and fought to keep the farms open. Unfortunately, the campaign did not succeed, and eventually the farms were shut down. But when the Liberal Party was elected back in 2016, I believe, a few years ago, one of their campaign promises was that they would reinstate the prison farms. And so that created this opportunity for alternative models to be proposed. And one of the things that we really want to emphasize here is that Evolve Our Prison Farms campaign, we're not sort of presenting ourselves as, you know, a new thing. So we very much sort of see the campaign as being born out of that same trajectory where we're very much just a sort of an evolving sort of form of activism that kind of came out of the Save Our Prison Farms campaign. Except now we have an opportunity to just, you know, say that we want the farms evolved if we're going to still have a farming model for the prisons. Cool. So where are we today? So over the next few months, that we actually have a very ideal window of opportunity to stop possibly the largest goat dairy operation in Canada that is going to be exploiting prison labor. What has happened is that we've learned correction services and Canadian Dairy Commission and Feihe and all these major key players have decided that they want to have this intensive factory farm model of milking goats. And obviously, we know that's going to create all sorts of, you know, ecological damage and, you know, harm against animals. So that is what we're going up against. But fortunately, the momentum is on our side for fighting justice, and we're seeing things starting to change. So I think the current ongoing pandemic has sort of brought about this awareness that, animal agriculture is one of the key contributors to zoonotic diseases spreading and being produced. And there has been more and more political organizing, on the ground organizing for prisoners who are obviously confined in these really crowded environments, and their lives are being put at risk. And so right now, there's just momentum for prisoners' justice in general amidst COVID-19 happening. And at the same time, we've seen that the Trudeau government has invested a significant amount of money in plant-based agriculture, which is great. And on top of that, it seems like internally the Liberal Party is going through a bit of a crisis right now, and they're about to present, and negotiate with other political parties as well, this new economic recovery plan. So, the opportunity, the door is wide open right now for all sorts of things to happen possibly, and we want to see Evolve Our Prison Farms sort of take advantage of that and make this part of that conversation about transforming our food systems, as well as fighting for prison justice. So at the same time, I think the campaign has existed for a few years now. So we've done Calvin specifically has done an incredible amount of research, and now we have a much clearer picture of what's really happening, who are the key players, what's going on behind the scenes, and the new relationships that's been built between folks in the farming and dairy industry, as well as animal rights activists and prison justice activists. Like, people are starting to come together. And again, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do these community forums, is to bring people together even closer, build those relationships, build those coalitions, so that we can actually tackle this issue through solidarity. So yeah, we're only a few months away from possibly major decisions on the future of prison farms. And so we want politicians to know that by advocating for what we're presenting here, our specific demands, that's where the votes will be, especially moving into the future. All right, so here are our specific demands, and what we want to do is we want to stop the goat dairy factory. So essentially, we want to stop this for-profit Pinot agribusiness. And this could be accomplished by a few different ways. So one of the things we can do is we can attempt to just try to at least slow it down at first, to allow for more consultation and review of existing proposals. But we could also, what we really want to have happen is we need a transition. So we need to transition to an alternative plant-based agriculture model. And here we want to talk about issues such as food security, as well as zoonotic diseases, as some sort of the main reasons why this transition is so necessary right now. And of course, we want to shut down the program too. If things don't really go our way, we'd rather just see this program shut down, because it's better to not have a prison farm that's exploiting animals and exploiting prison labor at all, right? So if we can't get an alternative. So what is actually considered a win? Ideally, we actually see prison farms transition to an ethical model as proposed by Evolve Our Prison Farms. But it would also be acceptable if prison farms just shut down, because prisons aren't good places, and many of us here very much identify as prison abolitionists, and we recognize that in an ideal world in the future, prisons themselves need to disappear as well, in order for a real just society to come about. And so the only losing scenario really is if just absolutely nothing changes. If we're stuck in this status quo, if things stay the same, then we have not succeeded. But again, this is something that Calvin pointed out, is that in a way, just by having this campaign exist over the past few years, we have already kind of permanently altered the conversation about prison farms, and we can all sort of be proud of the fact that we can think of that as a win in itself, in a way. So some of these images, the one on the top right, Planting Justice is an organization based in, I believe, in Oakland, California. And so just thought we were kind of referencing their work as one example of what an alternative ethical model might look like. So this is a community-based food justice group that is focused on food sovereignty, economic justice, and community healing. And the way they go about doing it is through these community garden programs. So if you go on the EOPF website, there are, I believe there's a page with just like a list of existing examples. There are also examples of actual animal rescue, rehabilitation, animal sanctuary type programs within prisons, one in Italy, one in Florida. And on the next slide, you'll see there are also similar sort of plant-based agriculture programs here. I believe the one in Alberta. Yeah, so this is in Alberta where prisoners actually harvest vegetables for the local food bank. Cool. And so now going on to our messaging and the main focus. So we definitely, like Calvin mentioned earlier, you know, this is not a single issue campaign. By addressing the prison farms, we are actually tackling so many different related issues simultaneously. So because of that, we can't just go about our advocacy work with just like a single issue focus and messaging. So some of the things that we definitely want to highlight is that exploitation of prison labor for private sector is actually a human and labor rights standards, and it violates human and labor rights standards, especially when prisoners are not paid as a living wage. So that is one of the issues that we want to highlight. Obviously, sustainable agriculture. We know that, you know, studies after studies in recent years have shown that animal agriculture is just not sustainable, regardless of what form, and that even supposedly the most sustainable animal farms are still much more ecologically damaging than plant-based agriculture. And we've also seen plenty of, one of the things that we want to do is we want to keep our messaging evidence-based. So when we're talking about prison farms or any kind of program that is supposedly beneficial to prisoners for the sake of rehabilitation, it's got to be evidence-based. And we're really glad that we're currently working with other researchers and scholars, Amy Fitzgerald, who's done tons of research on how slaughterhouse work and animal exploitation work can be traumatizing to slaughterhouse workers, right? So right there is a significant sort of evidence that shows that, okay, if that's the case for slaughterhouse workers, what does that mean for prisoners to be getting them to participate in animal exploitation work? So very much we're engaging with the existing research on both animal agriculture as well as issues regarding prisons. Cool. So again, pointing out that the current model that is being proposed is for the private sector, not nonprofit, for the benefit of the prisoners, and that this new model can potentially compete with farmers in the free market economy. So this is actually a negative for Canadian farmers and local farmers as well. Again, it brings up all these public health related issues about zoonotic diseases, lagoons from animal farms polluting local communities, and also the Evolve Our Prison Farms campaign. Our proposal is in alignment with United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so, and in general, just kind of the ongoing international conversations about what sustainability requires, regardless of whether it's the United Nations or looking at things like the Paris Accord. What we're proposing is for a much more ecologically friendly and sustainable future. So again, just things we want to avoid is any kind of single issue framing. We understand that, for example, we have quite a bit of support. One of our main basis of support for this campaign comes from the animal advocacy movement, because people, don't want to see goats being exploited in prison farms. So early on in the campaign, we got a lot of support from animal rights folks, and which is great, and that is absolutely amazing, and it's totally awesome. But we want to avoid, for example, like when we're doing advocacy work, only talking about veganism or only talking about the benefits of plant-based agriculture for the animals. It's important for us engaging in this campaign to learn from other perspectives and other movements and other communities, so that we can simultaneously highlight all these different issues. And also, we want to avoid any kind of discourse or rhetoric that could be stigmatizing against prisoners, and just avoid any kind of stigma and shaming and that kind of stuff too. And this is the things that we've been learning from prisoners' justice advocates. And on top of avoiding it, I would go as far as to say, we have the obligation to actually challenge that. So if we're for prisoners' justice, when we hear things like, you see how common this, even on our Facebook or social media comments, you still see this all the time. Like people are saying like, oh, like, why should we care about prisoners? Like, they committed crimes, they deserve to be exploited. This is what they deserve, and we shouldn't have to care about them. Or something like the being exploited is actually good for them and good for society. Those are the kind of things that we really need to challenge in our campaign whenever it comes up. And that's it. Let's check the time real quick here. Cool, almost 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock Eastern time, I guess. Great. All right, so currently we have a petition that has been circulating, and this is sponsored by MP Paul Manley of the Green Party. And he's also written on his own blog this really powerful letter about why he is sponsoring this petition. So we'll share the links for those things. And we're asking everybody to please keep promoting and sharing this petition, get your friends and family to sign it. And we have things that are planned for the next few weeks. One of the action plans we want to do is we want to try and connect with at least one volunteer liaison in each riding to contact their MP about this prison farm issue. So, this would involve just arranging an appointment, getting a meeting with your MP, contacting them, and sharing the Evolve Our Prison Farms proposal with them. And locally in Kingston, and Julia will talk about this a little bit more with more details. There's a plan there to deliver hard copy petitions to Mark Garrison's office on September 4th. Cool, and that concludes the presentation part of this meeting, and we'll soon open this up for discussions. Just let me end this screen share here. Cool. All right, Julia, you wanna talk about Q&A?
Sure. So no one has flagged wanting to ask a question or comment, but I think, we are a very organized group of people here. So if folks want to unmute their lines and share any thoughts, feedback, if anyone's in the Kingston area and would like to participate in the September 4th action, then please let me know. We'll be sending out an email after our presentation today with some resources. So one of the things we came together with is a letter template sharing support for Paul Manley's petition. So it's pretty straightforward, and you can just tweak it to how you see fit. And we've also got a lovely one-pager that Calvin drafted that really kind of summarizes some key points to keep it simple and straightforward. And then another resource is a list of stakeholders who have either positions of power or are potential advocates for the campaign within government as well. So any way that you can reach out and share your support is certainly welcomed. So if anyone would like to unmute their line and just feel free to.
Sorry, Stephanie asked a question in the chat. I just saw it now. I was
Oh,
scrolling
okay.
in. So Stephanie says, thank you so much, Darren, for that overview of the campaign. A question about the corporation. Can you tell us more about Feihe and their involvement in Canada ag export? So already, I guess I'm assuming you mean like if there's any relationship already established, do they have other contracts? Cool. Calvin, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to answer that question.
Hi, Calvin.
Hi, Shaun. And yeah, let me give a shout out to my buddy, Shaun Shannon. We actually have a former prison farm worker here on the forum. And you couldn't be more welcome, Shaun. We've become great buddies over the years. And I'd love to hear from you, maybe after we talk about this infant formula question.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Feihe infant formula factory, it started construction in 2016 at the same time as the prison farms were being reintroduced. They've had tens of millions of dollars in subsidies at the provincial and federal level, and a lot of hand-holding right up to the Canadian Dairy Commission down to the local municipal level. There's a lot of, they're very, very quiet. They don't answer media questions. And based on recent information that came out through an agricultural journalist, an investigative journalist who's been following this story, it has been an embattled corporation. The goat dairy industries in Ontario and Quebec did not want the company to come to Canada. They saw it as preparing to poach their farmers and their supply. And apparently in Quebec, the goat dairy industry literally laid waste to its own industry in a message to the Feihe Corporation saying, no, you're not going to get us. And then apparently Donald Trump, President Trump also wanted to oppose this factory coming to Canada. The factory has a very shady history. They got kicked off of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange for fraud and embezzlement of over $1 billion. And then they got kicked off of the New York Stock Exchange. So they have had no end of problems and scandals. And Trump didn't want them here. According to this journalist, he says Trumpy knew they were crooks. I can't validate that. I can't verify it other than it's true that they were kicked off the stock exchanges and that there's a lot of questions around the finances for that corporation. They have had trouble getting any contracts. If you talk to goat farmers in Canada and the goat dairy industries, they will tell you that everybody has been expecting contracts to take place and that nothing is happening. There is a whole lot of nothing happening. And the latest industry rumors is that Trump's tariffs that he imposed on infant formula exports out of Canada, specifically because of this company, that it was very intentional and that it was very successful in making sure that that company could do nothing. And then apparently also the World Trade Organization and other countries, Australia and New Zealand, are waiting for that company to export even an ounce of infant formula out of Canada, and they're going to launch a World Trade Organization complaint against this. It is embattled, and so we see a lot of problems for this corporation to succeed, and there is essentially no other viable market for the goat milk industry right now. The prison farms still maintain that they haven't signed a contract, which is not a surprise because nobody has. But it looks like the prison farm model is in jeopardy, and this could spell an end to the prison farm program unless it transitions. So like we like to say, the only way to save our prison farms today is to evolve. So Shaun, did you have something that you wanted to say before we look at some other questions that are popping up? You're on mute, so you'll have to just unmute your...
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. So from what I understand, I talked to somebody today. In fact, I got a phone call today from a guy at Frontenac, and the guys there aren't looking forward to working on this farm at all. They're having a hard time finding guys to even come to the camps to do this. and the majority of guys want to go back to where it was before with the animal interaction, and they can't see it happening if we keep going this way. So it's getting heavy. It's getting really heavy. So.
Yeah, thank you, Shaun. I mean, this is just so important. This isn't just about what we would like to see happen. This is what prisoners want to see. And people who worked on the former farms, there was a long waiting list. It was a very popular program. You had a very small number of animals that you worked with. There was the interaction, there was compassion there. There were downsides too. Nobody wanted to work in the slaughterhouse. Nobody wanted to send their cows off at the end of their milk productivity, but there were benefits to working with the animals. And that's essentially what animal therapy is. It's very, very healing. There's so much potential. And even inmates who are still incarcerated, when they found out prison farms were coming back, they thought it was the old model coming back, just like a lot of people thought. And when the government held public consultations in 2016, it was public consultations to get feedback on what people thought about the old program. There has never been a public consultation on this new program and all of its implications for human rights, prison labor, animal welfare, the climate, the environmental impact in Kingston. So really the government did pull a fast one over everybody here.
Just a quick comment here. If it wasn't for that program, a lot of guys would still be in prison. You know, that program worked for a lot of people. Myself, for example, it worked for me, but a lot of guys that got out of Frontenac have not gone back into prison since. And it's because it's working with the animals, directly with the animals. When you put in this goat operation, where it's going to be a factory farm, you're not going to have any of that old program left at all. So I don't know why. If they're going to go with that, then they should just shut it down and forget about it. You know, it's not going to work the way they're doing it. It really isn't.
Yeah. Thank you, Shaun. Thank you. Exactly. So somebody who has spent the last decade waiting for these farms to come back and fighting for that is saying today, if this is what they're doing, then shut it down. That really means something. And it's also, there was another inmate who worked who was the editor of a prison magazine, and he shared our vision for a different model for these prison farms. And he, as he described it, is that prisoners can lead the way to our better future. There's an excitement around the vision of actually transitioning these prison farms into something that does some good for society, that does good for prisoners, and that doesn't involve anything that's harmful towards anybody at all. So I see there's some other questions here. Would a plant-based agriculture model be sustainable fiscally, so financially? Is that an important question to be asking from the mindset of those making these decisions?
Calvin? Yeah.
It's not important. It's
So,
not important.
I'm with Food Security Structures Canada, and we really feel that there's an important role for us to play in helping to solve a problem of food security. And we're not just talking about for inmates, we're talking all across the country. Currently, over 80% of our foods imported that are produce-based are from outside of our country. And that's a serious problem for everybody in this country. And we have a very good solution that will work for any kind of climate. And the technologies that we implement are circular, in that we reuse everything within our structures and our buildings. We are using technology that can actually enhance plant growth by upwards of 50%, which is higher than any greenhouse structure that exists currently. And with this model, we can give meaningful employment. We can help engage the community by bringing extra produce back to the people that need it within our community. So not just helping to feed our inmates, which obviously encourages good nutrition and nourishment that uplifts all of us, but can be spread around. And so, I mean, we kind of look at that we could be part of that solution and want to work with Evolve Our Prison Farms and other community groups to raise us all up so that we're not dependent from outside of where we live. So yes, there's an economic model that will definitely work. Automatically, we could save 30% on providing food within the system right away. We can provide certification and training for people so that when they leave the institution, they can go back into the community and be part of this for all cultures, all of us. It's not just inmates. So that would be my solution that we can offer for this group and for others.
Yes, thank you, Lisette. I believe that technologies like this would be an excellent fit for the prison farms and for our government to experiment and model what's possible for sustainable food production, local food production. The question of profitability is a very, very tricky one, because what we want to guard against is for-profit prison labor. We even have support from within the Conservative Party of Canada that was responsible for shutting the farms down. Now, many of the MPs are supportive of what we are proposing, because in fact, they are seeing this as an investment of tens of millions of dollars into for-profit prison labor and the human rights violations involved in that. And one MP for the riding that Joyceville Institution is in, where the goat factory is going to be, Scott Reed, he's a Conservative MP, and his personal belief is that prison programs like this should operate at a deficit, not for profit, so that the incentive is only to use prison programs like this to the extent that they are effective and relevant. The minute you start making money off of a program, then the incentive becomes to pursue greater profits, and that's exactly what we're seeing with these new prison farms pursuing an economy of scale. And that's why it's tricky, because one of the changes after the former prison farms shut down, the Correctional Service of Canada privatized its food service. It's called food service modernization. So now all the food is outsourced, it's centrally produced, it's frozen, it's called the cook chill system, distributed, thawed, and served. And the quality of food has never been lower. So they've got private contracts, and that's why prison farms are no longer going to feed prisoners, because they can't compete with the private contracts, and that's why they have to then look at the private sector. So the government, in reintroducing these prison farms, found itself with this very strange set of circumstances that almost forced them to privatize prison labor. And it's all on this trajectory of privatization and exploitation. And with a little bit of creativity, you know, we have come up with this alternative. If it can't feed prisoners and it can't be selling to the private sector, then what can prison farms do? They can actually be relevant to rehabilitation while addressing social needs and striking at the roots of oppression across the board and addressing the kinds of societal problems that contribute to what we call crime. And those contributors are very often poverty, addiction, oppression, systemic racism, trauma. Prison farms can address all of this if done right. And that's why what we are proposing is the solution to all of these problems, the old problems, the new problems. And what we need is for our government to recognize we are not the bad guys, you know, raining on their parade. We have the solution that our government needs and that our correctional service needs. And if done right, this will plant the seeds of change for the system as a whole. So,
yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add a perspective here on that, maybe from a slightly different angle about this idea of being financially sustainable, I guess. And one thing I think it's important to point out is that what is the sort of the cost of maintaining a financially sustainable food system of any kind, right? So if we're talking about a plant-based agriculture model that is sustainable fiscally, the existing, so outside of prisons, you know, if we look at the existing plant-based agriculture farms, they're highly exploitative, right? So a lot of migrant workers are working in horrible conditions. They're not given the status that they deserve and the protection and the rights that they deserve. A lot of them face deportation, discrimination, all these kinds of issues too. And so from, I guess, from a different angle, from sort of a more kind of organizing perspective of labor organizing, is that, you know, I think it's still really early to say like what are the possibilities of building coalitions and solidarities between these different kinds of movements. But you know, there's certain things that we know for sure, which is that when it comes to labor and when it comes to lives, there's certain human lives that have just been made to be more disposable in order to sustain a certain economy or industrial system, right? And we're seeing this, and prison labor is like that. Migrant workforces are like that. We're seeing this in California right now, you know, like who are the ones being exploited to fight those major forest fires? They're just the wildfires. It's prisoners who are being exploited. And so anytime that, so I understand like, Calvin's perspective, you know, we have, it is a very tricky thing, is like we don't want to get into this thing where we're potentially sort of engaging with like ideas of and proposals that involve exploiting prison labor. But I think it's also important at the same time to recognize that actually prison labor is already so vulnerable. It is already being exploited. And so what is organizing that workforce look like, so that it's not, we're no longer engaging in sort of this competition idea between like how prison labor could outcompete with local farms. It's really about uniting the workers somehow, right? And that's tricky, and it might be outside of the scope of this campaign, because again, when you run a dedicated campaign, you have to be really focused on a specific issue. And here we're dealing with just trying to stop a horrible prison farm from happening to something that is significantly better. But I think that's something that is important to keep in mind when we start talking about things like financial sustainability and profitability and stuff like that, is who are the ones who are being sacrificed or exploited.
Yeah.
You can't unionize prisoners. You can't unionize prisoners, so that's not going to happen. I mean, you can organize the guys, but you can't unionize them. They're not going to allow that to happen. They're not going to allow that to happen. You know, I understand what you're saying, but you can't go into a prison and say, okay, let's get these guys all unionized and get them organized, and so that they're not being exploited, because they'll just exploit them anyways. You know, they'll give them the option. You either do what we tell you to do, or we'll send you to another institution where you're doing nothing. And that's the way it works now. You know, that's how they get these guys at these farms. That's how they get them to work. They threaten them with transfers. They threaten them with taking away paroles, and they dangle that carrot in front of you. And you can't. I mean, 20 years ago, yeah, you'd have no problem unionizing the prison. You'd have no problem doing that, because 20 years ago it was a different breed of guys in the institution. But today, you're not going to get. You can't do that. They're just, the guys now are just, they want to get out, and they'll do whatever they have to do. And if they're being exploited, some of them just don't care. And that's. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's going to be hard to get them to change that aspect of it. It really is.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that what we're asking here is for an end to a penal agribusiness. The prison farms should not be a business, period. And participation in the prison farm program should not be labor. It's not a job. It's an opportunity to have, if done right, it's an opportunity to have healing experiences, beneficial, therapeutic, beneficial, if done right. And then if it's not a money-making industry, if it's not a business. So we are developing our alternative business case, which could almost be called an unbusiness case or a non-business case for the prison farms. And part of that is going to be a redefining of the parameters that is required for this to be anything remotely ethical. So we're going to set that standard, and one of the recommendations might just be that this has to be run not under CORCAN. So CORCAN is essentially the business industry within Correctional Service of Canada. They run the textiles, the manufacturing, the woodworking, the abattoir, the slaughterhouse. All of it's run under CORCAN, and their mandate is to generate a profit. So we are very skeptical about whether or not the prison farms will be or can even be responsibly or ethically run under CORCAN. but that doesn't preclude the possibility of it being done right within different parameters. And we are the ones who are going to define what those parameters need to be. And if it is not for profit, and if it is addressing needs within the communities, this is something you talk to inmates. They love doing their food drives. They love what they can contribute to food banks. They like being able to do things that give some sense of meaning. Right now, within prisons, there is very little programming of any kind that is of any benefit to inmates. It's a wasteland. So we would accept as a satisfactory outcome the prison farm shutting down compared to what's happening here. But at the same time, there is so little of any good within the Correctional Service of Canada that's one of the reasons that we're fighting so hard here to see something good actually introduced. But we are very skeptical of whether or not the Correctional Service is actually capable within the current circumstances of doing right by this program. So we're watching very carefully. We're very guarded about it. And certainly if, there's a question here about the idea of a program operating at a deficit, perhaps revenue neutral would have better optics. And that is true. I believe that any responsibly run program should be at least self-sustaining. And that's what I would like to see for the prison farms. And there's no reason that it can't be. If the Correctional Service of Canada can't figure out how to self-sustain a program with their 1,500 acres of land, then perhaps they shouldn't be getting into farming.
I think Varun has his hand up and also Shaun after that.
No, I'm okay. I'm done. I'm done.
Okay.
I'll take my hand down. I got something to say. I'll say it.
If I could just say, I totally agree with what you're saying, Calvin. This has to be something that's beneficial for the inmates, something that's meaningful. And revenue neutral is absolutely positive that as a solution that we could provide, because we can gauge what they need within their own facilities. And if they wish to provide more within the communities, then we can provide that structure and at a higher return than, I only say productive agricultural return for the community as a whole, and give meaningful work to and opportunities for people to participate in the production of food and supplying others. That's our sole purpose. I mean, that's our main purpose was actually to help Indigenous communities in remote locations who also face the same issues of food security and sovereignty. This is also the same, but we're dealing within this island of a prison, right? If I could say it as bluntly as that.
Thank you, Varun.
Hi, everyone. Just Calvin, thanks again for organizing this. Julia and Darren as well for everything that you put into this. And I just had a quick comment in regards to the shift toward what's been talked about recently. And I was thinking how vital and important it is for us to have that consultation and communication with individuals that were formerly have experience working on former prison farms, and as hard as it could be, the current ones as well, and how I feel like that has to be a part of this whole process, because regardless of the exploitation that's going to end up occurring in any proposal, there's going to be some critique that can eventually come up out of anything we end up proposing. To allow individuals that have experienced prison farms and that will be potentially experiencing prison farms, so they can have any agency at all in this to decide what they want to do with any notions of rehabilitation or whatnot that the rest of society is kind of imposing on them. I think just uplifting their voice to see what they want. We should kind of never kind of forget about that. Which if the more opportunities we have to be able to do that, the better. Whether that means they're for or against it, or whether they're for the therapy programs. But the one feedback that I really want to kind of include is I love the emphasis we're having that this isn't a single issue campaign, and just to add to the complexity of this, how does everyone feel about potential consultation with the Indigenous communities of the, forgive me for pronouncing the name probably incorrectly, the Tyendinaga, that's who I believe the Indigenous land in Kingston is situated on, and there's been academic literature already out there on just the brutal effect of just having a prison at all in Canada on Indigenous land and their sovereignty. And regardless of whatever models end up being adopted as a result of all of our prison farms or the government themselves, I think it would show us a considerable amount of importance and value in finding out what do the Indigenous community whose land the prison's on in the first place, what do they think about it? What do they think about the concept of rehabilitation or reintegration on inmates on their land, whether that happens through factory farming, therapy, or whatnot? Because we have a very good grasp at the moment of how this isn't a single issue campaign, but we can also kind of add and kind of respect their perspective on this as well. I think that'd give us another toolkit as well. So a tool in the box to kind of respect their agency and sovereignty, but at the same time strengthen the campaign as well.
Yes, thank you, Darren. That is very, very important. And if people are not aware, the Indigenous overrepresentation in the prison systems in Canada is severe. The most recent reports from the correctional investigators that approximately 30% of the federal prison population in Canada is Indigenous. And in women's institutions, that number is significantly higher. So you can't divorce these issues. And I was recently in contact with Margaret Robinson, who is a Mi'kmaq scholar, and she provided a bit of her feedback. She says, from an Indigenous perspective, you could argue that forced work in industrial farming ruptures Indigenous relationships to animals and contradicts the Truth and Reconciliation Commission call to action number 42 regarding justice. And that is where the federal, provincial, and territorial governments commit to the recognition and implementation of Aboriginal justice systems in a manner consistent with the treaty and Aboriginal rights of Aboriginal peoples. So these prison farms are a violation of human rights, of what's good for animals or for the environment, and a violation of our treaties with Indigenous peoples, and an abuse of people who are significantly overrepresented in the prison system. And that's one of the reasons that I'm very appreciative of the Green Party of Canada and Paul Manley sponsoring this petition. They are connecting these dots as well and raising awareness about how these new prison farms represent modern day slavery, and it is going to be capitalizing on the backs heavily of Indigenous populations and people of color, and it's completely inconsistent with our government's commitment to reconciliation and anti-racism. So yes, it would be excellent to build relationships with the Indigenous communities in Kingston, in the area referred to as Kingston, in the country known as Canada, and just try to build solidarity across these movements, because there is the intersection there. And together we believe that we can come up with a model, truly a democratic model, that everybody can applaud and uphold, and that violates nobody's rights or lives or well-being. So that's what we are working towards with our business case, and it is being developed by Dr. Amy Fitzgerald and Dr. Amanda Wilson, deconstructing the current model from all of these perspectives and building an alternative model, including redefining the parameters that is going to be required for this to be sustainable and ethical. So are there any last questions or comments? We want to try to stick to the time frame here, but is there anything else that somebody would like to add or ask while we have this opportunity? And as we go forward, we hope to do this again and perhaps have different speakers or guest perspectives coming in. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of this, I've been in contact with Elle Jones, who is somebody that I'm very excited to have. She is willing to come on as a guest presenter, and she is a prominent Canadian abolitionist, a woman of color, a spoken word artist, and somebody who fights tirelessly for the human rights of our incarcerated brothers and sisters. So we're very much looking forward to having her perspective come into this as well. What's next and how can you help? As Darren mentioned at the end of the presentation, right now we want this petition to fly. So anything you can do to share and promote this petition, which calls for an end to this prison agribusiness, the prevention against prison labor for the private sector, and a transition to an alternative model such as we have proposed, which would be a nonprofit model serving a social justice function. So it's got all of the everything that we need right there in one petition. And then of course we want people in every riding of Canada to write or contact your MP. Put this on their radar. This is something that 99% of Canadians would have an issue with, what's happening here with these prison farms, and they're not being told. So if you have connections also with the media, we need to raise awareness about this before this is implemented. So we know that the Correctional Service of Canada is still putting out the messaging that they are planning on to acquire the first 800 goats this year. And they are working with the architects and engineers on the industrial goat factory that they plan on constructing at a cost of approximately $10 million at Joyceville Institution. And remember that if people have the question about the financial sustainability of a plant-based model, first of all, ask any plant-based farmer, is it possible to be financially self-sustaining? Yes, of course it is. And there are ways to get around the prison labor for the private sector if this is purely to serve a social justice function. There's a model in Ottawa where they actually, what was it called? I forget what it was called right now. I just found out about it, and they have quarter acres of land that people can sign up for. It's your quarter acre. They give you all the tools, all the equipment, all the knowledge. They do the cover crops, the fertilization that's required. They set you up. You go and you work your quarter acre. You learn the skills involved in that. If you do well, you can expand to a half acre. And by the end of that, you have basically a certifiable skill that you can go out and start your own business and join farmers markets. And you've got the skills of food production, healthy food production, sustainable food production, agriculture, organic, and you've set somebody up for life with a skill that they're not going to gain in an industrial goat factory. So we want to be equipping people with skills and with meaningful experiences. And this is something that the prisoners that we do speak to, it's a vision that they share and support. And like Shaun said, they don't want to work in this goat factory, and they certainly don't want to work for the man, and they don't want to work for the institutional profit, and they don't want to work for, making infant formula for China either. So alternatives are possible, and we are continuing to develop them to demonstrate to our government and to the Correctional Service what's possible. So please do follow on social media as well. Facebook is the main source of information. As we get information, we put it out there. And we also have Twitter and Instagram accounts. Share, talk about this, ask questions, post comments, engage with us. We want a conversation. We've been having a conversation for 4 years, and we have no intention of stopping anytime soon. So thank you all very much for being a part of this.
Great. I was just going to quickly add, sorry, Calvin.
Yep.
Another thing that we could use some help with is if you know of any individuals or organizations that would be interested in helping out with this campaign, or would find themselves having a stake in this issue, please connect us with them, both for something like this community forum, if we could have them as a guest speaker, or just someone who we could work with in advancing this campaign.
Yes, please help us make the connections. And if anybody wants to volunteer, talk to Julia, talk to Darren, sign up, and there's no end of ways that we can use your help in this cause. We're getting there. We have made tremendous progress, and we are not letting go. So we will get there one way or another. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll look forward to the next one.
Thanks, Calvin.
Thanks, Shaun.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.